Here we go. I think it's...
Yep, we're good. You can see the little red dot in the corner anyway. Morning, everybody. My name's Deborah Cairns. I'm the Managing Director here at Net Defence. We provide across the region and also, well, across the UK, but we have offices both in Gateshead and in Stirling in Scotland. The core services that we offer is cyber resilience and cyber security, IT MSP, and then telephony and comms. Those are our three domains. We joined the North East Automotive Alliance to be able to support the members of NEAA and really giving them practical awareness, understanding of cyber, as well as our other services to help you all to make informed decisions. I don't do slides, but there'll be a white paper will come out to support this, and Laura will get that out to everybody and those that weren't able to attend today as well, which will support this session. I like it to be interactive, but I get that cyber is sometimes a bit of a dry topic. So if you've got questions, by all means, unmute yourself and ask the question as you're going along, or if you pop it in the chat, Laura will pick those up, and she'll keep an eye on time. So let's start right at the beginning, kind of what is cyber. Cyber is just a word that I think a few years ago didn't even exist, but these days we're at the point of almost overuse. We're seeing the word cyber put in front of so many different words: cyber security, cyber crime, cyber threat, cyber attack, and so on and so on. But if we really step back and look at what cyber really is, the dictionary definition donates that it's information technology, so your IT, devices and all tasks and actions that are completed using that device. So that includes collecting, storing, processing, transmitting, access, and linking any data that you have. When we look at it in its most simplest form, it just means something that you are doing on a device that is connected to the internet. We start looking at cyber security and what that really means. It's about the precautions that you are taking as an individual, both in your personal life and at home, and then within your business life and at work, to protect yourself against cyber crime, especially unauthorized access to computer systems and the data that you care about the most in your business. What we start to see emerge in more recent times is the word resilience being associated with cyber. And that really is looking at how you can really kind of bring together your ability to prepare for, to respond, and also recover, not just from a cyber attack, but a security breach as well. In the following sessions, we will talk in a bit more detail about what those types of events look like. With so much information available out there in the ether and on the digital platforms that we all use every day, it is sometimes difficult to really know where to start when it comes to your cyber security. Here in Net Defence, we do strive to really make that as simple and as clear as possible, making it affordable and attainable to all. That's really what is at our core. And what's the core principles for your kind of protecting your data and your information is prevent it from happening. If you can't prevent it, detect it so you know it's happening, and then have in your bag already how you will respond to either actual threats and incidents on your systems and data. In Net Defence, we have just brought to life a new service for us, which is business resilience as a service. I've got Craig Hamilton on the call today, but it's Craig Whiteman, who is the most active member in NEAA. If you wanted to look at that in more detail, I'm sure I'd be happy to talk you through. What we've done is taken a cluster of our core services, bundled those together, and what we're saying is by bringing those core services together, you are making yourself as resilient as you possibly can be. So then looking at what a cyber attack really is in its simplest form. It's a malicious attempt to access your business system or your personal computer, a mobile phone, a gaming system, basically any device that is attached to the internet or is Bluetooth connected as well. Attacks come in many forms. I'm going to pick one or two to talk, and again in the future webinars we have, we'll go into a lot more detail. Malware, that is a file or a code that has been injected into your system, and it will just perform any action that the cyber criminal wants to see happen. Phishing is a social engineering attack, and that is where they are playing on your bias and your human reaction to get data from you. So whether that's your login credentials, it might be your bank details, your credit card. And we see various versions of phishing as it's evolved over the years. Denial of service is one of the most well-known. That is where they will, we saw it happen with Xbox several years ago. My son got an Xbox for Christmas. No one could actually get onto the Xbox Live platform to download the update and get it working. What they do is they ping that website hundreds and thousands of times so that the website can't withstand the traffic that's trying to travel through, and it will basically bring that website down. More commonly used in the business world is business email compromise. That's where they're taking control of a genuine email account. So they've got the login information and they will use that to either communicate with others or perform actions within the organization that they've managed to get into. And credential reuse is a very common one. That is where you've put your email address and a password into an unsecure website, and they've managed to get onto that website and retrieve those credentials. They're then going to try and go to as many websites as they can to find where you may have used that login somewhere else. And it could be that you've used it for your bank, for example, or it could be your business email account. They're looking really to see where you've reused it so they can access it based on information they have. From a cyber risk point of view, let's really look at it. Risk, just like any risk, cyber risk doesn't differ. It's exposure or the chance of injury or loss. It's a situation involving exposure or a chance of danger or a hazard. We look at cyber risk, it's really the chance of your business information and communication systems being accessed by an unauthorized person that could lead to loss or damage within your business. Risk really implies the likelihood or probability of an event happening. Therefore, the risk-based probability of a bad event happening to your business information systems, leading to a loss of either your confidentiality, so they've removed and stolen really confidential information. They're impacting the integrity, so they're deleting, removing, changing records, so it's no longer true data within your systems, or they're affecting the availability, so they're removing the ability for your business employees to be able to do their day-to-day business. Risk can orientate from anywhere. This includes a third party attack, so a hacker or a cyber criminal, depending on what you want to call them. It can also come through a third party vendor or a supplier. And one of the sessions we do have planned is about supply chain risk, and that's where that session will focus on. You can also have internal and insider risk. And that is really where you have an individual or a rogue employee within your business who is either has failed to adopt best practice and has caused a data breach by human error, by accident, or you can have a malicious employee who is set out to steal or expose confidential information and data from your systems. Really, to begin looking at your cyber risk, it's really about looking at your IT systems or anywhere that you hold your data. The most common and globally known method for that is what we call the CIA triad. That's looking at your confidentiality, integrity, and availability of those systems. And it becomes very much an intrinsic part to any business continuity planning that you might be doing or your disaster recovery processes. Confidentiality, think of that as access control. Who should have information to which system at which time and which piece of data. And that's really making sure that you're looking at authorized access. Integrity is the accuracy of the data that you're holding in your systems. So again, it's making sure that the data is complete and accurate. And if it's not, that's going to influence your ability to perform your day-to-day activities. And then availability, that's making sure that the system is able to log on the system when you need to be able to log on the system and perform any action that is required in your day-to-day work. I think risk, when we look at it, there's three things that you can do with risk. You can accept it and you can live with it and take a chance. You can mitigate that risk and that you can perform some actions that will reduce. You can never 100% remove risk, just like you can't remove health and safety risk, finance risk. You cannot 100% mitigate cyber risk. You can, however, take actions to reduce that down to a level that you can accept, and then you can transfer risk. Whether we realize it or not, we manage risk every day, whether that is protecting our homes. Do we have a burglar alarm? Do we have CCTV? What door locks do we have on to keep the windows closed? So we do that even really without thinking about it. It's become so inherent to kind of how we live our lives every day. We protect our children by teaching them to cross the road, safe behaviours. So we're always considering and deciding what we want to do with risk. And to be fair, cyber risk is no different. When we look at business risk, health and safety has been around, for decades now. We wouldn't start a piece of work without considering health and safety. What we'd really like to see happen is that when we're performing work, whether that is your day-to-day activities or you may be running a big project, you start to factor in that cyber risk into that area as well. So it becomes more inherent in it at its core, security by design rather than by default or by post-action, is really what we're looking at. Looking at probability and who's at risk, it's fair to say on a lot of occasions I get asked, who's the risk and why? I think the one thing that I would have to say is that it used to be if it might happen. So whether that is a phishing attempt or whether that's someone trying to log in with rogue credentials, it's very much now when it will happen. And when you look at the technical controls that all businesses have in place, we are constantly being hit by these activities by cyber criminals. But who are they? So we've got state-sponsored threat actors. So that is hostile states such as Russia, China. Unfortunately, that list does get bigger. They're often funded by hostile governments. So they've got a lot of cash available to them to be able to perform these actions. We've got what's often called as a hacktivist. So they are out to cause damage, and they are performing the same actions as a financially driven cyber criminal, but they tend to do it for social or political objectives rather than just financial gain. In individual teams of cyber criminals, so organized crime is definitely up there now. If you can perform something hidden behind a laptop, the risk of being caught reduces down from that point of view, as opposed to your more traditional crimes. You would see those types of gangs happen and take place in the physical world, then moving that over to the digital world. And then it goes right down to teenagers and young adults, some of which are doing it to see if they can do it. Some of them are becoming more involved in those criminal gangs. So why are they attacking us? Financial gain sits as the #1 return on investment for them. Data theft, large-scale business interruption, risk awareness, social and political issues, and then individual kudos. Look what I can do. And a bit of boasting, and that tends to be the younger element of what we see, as opposed to those that are attached to criminal organizations. Mostly they want to access your business or your customers' financial information. They want to get their hands on, excuse me 1 second, I've got to restart my computer. Let's not have that turn off in the middle. They want sensitive personal data. They want your customer or staff member email addresses, login credentials. They want access to your IT infrastructure, or they want full access to your IT services, the ability to accept online payments, for example. And then another one is also intellectual property. If they can get their hands on a trade secret or product design, and they can get that, is worth a lot of money to your competitors. So they're also looking from that point of view. If we then look at the sectors that are at the greatest risk, so it's based on stats from 2024 from the Information Commissioner's Office on data breaches that have happened in the previous 12 months. Health sits up there, closely followed by education and children. Retail and manufacturing is third in that ranking, local government in fourth, and charity and voluntary sector is sitting at #5, which certainly I found a bit of a shock when I first started looking at stats several years ago. I did make the naive assumption they wouldn't go try and get a charity, and in reality, everyone's a target, so that they don't have a conscience. We have to remember they are criminals, so they don't think like you and I on that basis. What we are seeing is that the stats are big. It is increasing. There are lots of different stats out there, and I'm not going to go in them all today, but we'll share that information so you can look at it. Business email compromise, ransomware, and supply chain attacks are the most common that we see. Business email compromise, that's taking your credentials and using your email address to pretend to be you. Ransomware is exactly like you see in the movies, they are going to lock down your system and expect you to pay money to have that unlocked. And then supply chain attacks. What we're seeing is bigger organizations or even smaller organizations are really investing in their cybersecurity. If you're the target, they can't get in the direct approach. They will use your supply chain to be able to leapfrog, to jump over from maybe a small supplier or a supplier who just hasn't invested in their cybersecurity, which means that they're easier to compromise, and will use that to leap into your systems to be able to get what they're looking for. Threat actor tactics. So threat actor is just another term for the cyber criminal. What we are seeing is they're constantly evolving. The more recent ones is referred to as TOAD, which is a telephone-oriented delivery attack. That is basically a phone call where they are doing it over voice. Multi-factor bypass attacks are becoming they're harder to get, and the whole point of putting multi-factor in is that it does give you a great sense of protection. But what we are seeing is that there are criminal gangs out there that are developing technology to get around this security. And it does look like the most recent attacks we've seen with the Marks and Spencers, it does look like it did involve bypassing some of the multi-factor controls. I think when we look at so that's what's happening. And what is going on out there and where the risk is coming from. I think in summary, no sector is safe. Even charities, not-for-profit organisations are targets. And while we see in the news the big targets, the Marks and Spencers, Adidas would just add some kind of breach goes down, a supply chain attack through the Tesco supply chain. They're the ones that make the news, which is great that we're getting attention. My concern is always that SMEs or smaller organisations think they're not a target, and that's not true. When you think about the makeup of the UK, about 99% of organisations are SMEs, more than 99%, and the stats are telling us there are tens of thousands of attacks happening that are being reported. It is as much of a problem for SMEs as it is for big organisations. The good news is that doing work to prevent this and detect this, it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be complicated. The first thing to look at is being prepared. It is when, it's not if. Making sure that your organisation has a robust business continuity plan. So should the worst happen, you know what you need to do. And certainly that Marks and Spencers have said that their test they've done really helped them in recovery from that point of view, and what we're seeing being reported in the press. Prevent, that's really where the heavy work tends to happen at that point. It's looking at risk assessments, it's looking at action plans, it's looking at what your risk tolerance is. One of the greatest schemes that can help you through that risk assessment is the Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials comes in two levels. You've got your Cyber Essential Basics, which is a self-assessment. It's looking at your technology and your technical controls and making sure you have the best practice in place, which will alleviate or mitigate some of the most commonly known threats. And then what we have is the Cyber Essentials Plus certification, which then goes into, it's an independent assessment. So if you've said you have multi-factor, the auditor that is then looking at that for you is testing to make sure that you do have that in place. Other things that you can be looking at is implementing security awareness training and phishing simulation. We spend such a lot of money on technical controls. We often fail to really help our employees to make better decisions and make them more aware of things they can do to prevent those acts happening. And it really is. It's a bit of a game in our organisation now. No one wants to get caught by the phishing simulation. Therefore, we're looking at all emails we've got coming in, thinking it's an internally developed one, and we don't want to end up on the league table for those that click those links. There are some simple steps that you can take today to ensure you're better protected, and that is really probably a conversation with your IT provider or your internal IT team, making sure your systems are patched and updated and done frequently, and particularly for the most important patches, they're applied as quickly as they possibly can be. Review and verify your access controls, particularly looking at admin and privileged access. Test and review your current defences. Review and test your backup and recovery, and making sure that your backup is not sitting on your active system. If you do get hit by a ransomware attack, the first thing they're going to be looking for is your backup, because if they can take that as well as your active online system, you really are backed into a corner at that point. You either build from scratch, or you would be looking to be able to recover from that backup. And if they have it, then really you're getting into the side of the territory of paying that ransom from that side. So, looking at those and what you have in your organization is a great starting step to see where you're at. So talking about what you can actually do with risks, we're going to talk about the 3 actions that you can take. You can accept it. We call that the cost of doing nothing. No 2 businesses are created the same. So what is acceptable from a risk perspective for one organization can be very different in another organization. The only thing I would challenge you with, if you are prepared to accept without taking a look at what you have in your business and where the information that you care about the most, is what the impact could be if you do nothing. You could lose your ability to operate. The average time to be down is around 21 hours. But if it is a large scale breach or a large scale ransomware, you could be looking at as much as almost 300 days to recover. Arnold Clark was hit by ransomware a couple of Christmases ago, and they've talked very much in the public domain, which is great because it helps us to see those live case studies. They had employees they paid for 6 months who were unable to do their job at all. That's how long it took them to get their systems back. Loss of reputation, depending on the sector that you're in. Reputation can be everything to some sectors and some industries. 85% of breaches have that human element in, and it's really looking at what you can be prepared to lose from a reputation standpoint. There is a financial penalty risk. The ICO, so the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK, they're responsible for upholding, protecting our personal data. They are issuing penalties and on a regular basis. So not only have you got the potential for a fine or a penalty from the ICO, you also have to factor in, if a lot of personal information was taken, you could find yourself facing a civil legal action to also pursue compensation from those individuals that were impacted. And then potentially your failure to win new business. If you are wanting to grow, which we all hope that we do, if your reputation and you're known that you have gone through a significant cyber attack, are they going to choose you as their new provider? So it's really taking a look at what you're prepared to live with, what you're prepared to lose. In the document we'll send over, there are also some things to help you looking at identification and resolution should an attack happen, and then 10 critical questions that you can ask during that to really identify where you're at and looking at the resolution and bringing your systems back online. We then look at mitigation, so we call that the cost of doing something. And there are lots of things that we can do. It really looks at your preventing an attack from happening or getting it down to the lowest possible risk. When you look at cyber criminals, they really only follow 2 paths. They will throw out a wide net and they will try to capture unknown targets to them, and they will push really hard, and they'll do it on a wide scale and hope to get lucky a few times. The other side of it is where they go after a specific target. So they've identified the organization that they want access to, that they want to cause the disruption to, or they see it as being a high value in a cash reward should they be successful. And those are the 2 paths that kind of happen. And that's a lot where the SME are being targeted, not because they'll yield a multi-million-pound payout for a ransomware attack, but if they trigger hundreds of smaller attacks or thousands of smaller attacks, when you add that money together, then that is going to give them the same yield that they would to get one large scale attack. Also, the chances are that the technology, that the big scale and the steps and measures they've implemented will far exceed what we would expect to see an SME spend and invest in from a security point of view. So it does unfortunately make the SME an easier target. So it's either on volume and trying to get as many as possible, or they are going after that one target. Really, you need to have a strong business continuity plan in place and disaster recovery. So your disaster recovery focuses on bringing your technical systems back online. So that is looking at what's been hit, where the damage is, what rebuild needs to happen so that your employees can go back to logging onto the system in their day-to-day job. Business continuity goes much, much further. That looks at your people, your processes, your buildings, so that they sit very much side by side. One will work without the other, to be clear. If you've got a business continuity plan, but no disaster recovery, no system, you can't log on, you can't get on with your day-to-day job. And in a world where everything is digital, you must have the two in working together. In disaster recovery, if you've lost your IT systems, which order do you bring them back? What checks do you do? So you can see how they sit together incredibly close. From different types of attacks, and it looks to update your security management. So that is your patching and your operating updates that you have on your devices. There is an additional two certs that you can look at if you decide that Cyber Essentials you want to go above just looking at the most common threats. And you can really start looking at ISO 27001, which is very much the global gold standard of information security and cyber and also data protection. It has the longest title now, where it's really started to absorb all of the other risks and all the other areas of concern. And then you also have sitting alongside it the IASME Cyber Assurance certification, which is a bit of a mini ISO. So if you're not wanting to pursue the ISO 27001, which is a lot of work, I'm not gonna kind of brush over the top of it. It is a huge investment, but very much is going to give you much more assurances that you have everything in place to keep your risk as low as possible. When you look at the cyber assurance, and it does mirror a lot with ISO, it's looking at risk assessments, it's looking at your backups, it's looking at your policy, incident management, data protection, and your operational management. So you can see it goes from just looking at technical controls with Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, and then it starts to really look holistically across your entire organization and making sure that you have everything in place to keep you secure and keep your risk level as low as possible. The final bit I wanted to talk today is about transference. So prior to the Data Protection Act being revamped in 2018, we used to be able to outsource risk. Unfortunately, with that change, you no longer, when you outsource an activity, the risk does not go with that activity. You then become jointly responsible for the risk. So if you've outsourced a particular process that involves data, you're responsible as well as your outsourced supplier, which when we look at transference and being that the only thing we're left with is cyber insurance from that point of view. In years gone by, cyber insurance is often given away free. That's no longer the case. If you were buying another insurance policy, they would often bolt on a small amount of cyber insurance along with that. We weren't really looking at the policies at that point. It was just another insurance policy we had. And as they were giving it away either for free or for a very small amount, most of us were accepting it. When we kind of hit 2020 and 2021, the world significantly changed and the insurers started to look at the volume of claims that were happening. And several of those insurers moved into an unprofitable position based on payout of insurance because they were either giving these insurance policies away or they were offering them for cheap. This caused the carriers and the brokers to really slow down and look at what cyber insurance really was. And it was incredibly turbulent in that time. It was really difficult for some companies to even get insurance at that point. They really started looking at how they were reducing their limits, reducing coverage. And just as cyber threats were evolving during that time, so was cyber insurance from that point of view. What we have seen in more recent times is it started to stabilize and it started to settle down. So kind of around the 2021 up to around the end of 2023, there was a lot of rejected applications for cyber insurance, or you had to present a lot of certifications or be prepared to fill out a lot of paperwork to demonstrate that you were doing all of the right things. And inside the document we'll share is the 12 controls that insurers still look for today. What we have seen is that in more recent times, so Gallagher, a global insurer, risk management and consultancy firm, they've reported that the rates have stabilised. We're seeing either they remain flat or they're actually declining, so the cost of insurance is coming down. And that's where it's gone right up to its peak. What that's seen is new providers emerge in the market, making the market more competitive and ultimately driving down the cost in some of those areas. What is true though is that they are still performing a lot of diligence. Claims frequency, despite the cost of insurance coming down, claim frequency is continuing to increase and grow up. Very much ransomware activity is at the core of most insurance claims. It spiked at 95% of insurance claims in Q3 of 2023 were related to a ransomware attack. While we're seeing the number of claims rise, the severity is pretty much contained. We've not seen the costs actually increase. So that is allowing, that's what we're seeing as improved security controls. So while they're able to infiltrate and perform the action, they're not able to take everything. So what we're seeing is they're getting into organizations and taking small pieces. And in fact, Arnold Clark, the chief exec, spoke at an event I was at recently, and Arnold Clark was a full ransomware attack that was deployed, but they only got about 5% of their data. So that's what we're talking about in kind of keeping it contained. So there would have been an insurance claim for that for sure, but instead of having to claim because they lost all of their data, they only had to claim on the 5% and what was associated with that loss of 5%. Coverage limits and capacities continue to expand in 2024. Insurers have regained some confidence in the market. And then we're seeing a lot of being able to, those that were rejected for insurance are now able to get insured. We're seeing renewals not spike year on year, which is what was happening around the 2021-22. So definitely starting to see some great changes. So if you have looked at cyber insurance before and it's been too expensive or you weren't able to meet the criteria, now's probably the time to take another look at that. And work with your insurer to see if that's something that you want to have in place. Looking forward, the underwriting continues to have very strong due diligence on it. It is totally focused on your IT controls, and they are constantly asking for more and more information. Limits, while we're not seeing the limits reduced across the board, what they are starting to see is they are stating some things will be removed from the policy, so your coverage is slightly changing, or the thresh of the limit, so the maximum you can claim in that period, you may see that has come down or is maybe not as much as you would have liked. While we are seeing the price decline, as I've said, or it's staying at a quite flat rate, the average cost of a data breach did reach its all-time high in July 2023 at $4.35 million at that point. So when we are seeing bigger organizations, they're paying more for their insurance, but when you look at the cost of that, it is significant in its totality. Coverage, expect exclusions, expect things like systemic risk, regulatory issues. You may, if you are operating in a country that's currently at war, you may see some additional reductions or removal from your policy from that. The cyber insurance market is expected to continue to expand and expand. When you look at the number of attacks, the number of businesses in the UK and those that don't have cyber insurance, they are making decisions to assess their business on quite a regular basis. So if you're an insurer, it's a great time to be alive for cyber insurance. It's definitely a growing market. but they are constantly learning from the data, which is becoming more available and more transparent, to learn what they want to cap, what they want to reduce, and what hoops they want you to jump through to be able to get yourself cyber insurance. There are 12 controls that sit underneath that, and it's still very prevalent today that you have those 12 controls in place. Otherwise, it is a case of you're not going to get that insurance. The 12 controls are best practice, and they've been best practice for in the IT world for a really long time, probably approaching decades. But I think what's happened over time is we've started to see those controls, the insurers see the value in them, and they've really pushed them to the forefront. So even if you're not going to go after insurance, by implementing and protecting the 12 controls, you are strengthening your cyber security. So it includes things like multi-factor authentication. So that's an additional password that's going to come to a different device, which means if the attacker has your login to, say, your 365 account, but you have a mobile phone that gives you a token, they'd need that mobile phone as well to be able to access. Looking at endpoint detection and response. So unfortunately, when cyber criminals are getting into our systems, they don't press the button immediately, and they can sit in our systems for sometimes months deciding on the best time to press that button. Most commonly, it happens on a bank holiday because there are less resources around, less likely to spot it, and less likely to be able to get the support from those organisations that step forward when these things happen. Arnold Clark happened over Christmas. Marks and Spencer's, Harrods, and the Co-op were hit over Easter. And that's where we're seeing the resources to respond are not as prevalent at that point. Endpoint detection and response, often known as EDR, that's really looking at your ability to identify something's happening in your system. And some of these systems are super smart, and they will start to action even without a human to press any buttons. They will start to do things like isolate devices, take things offline to stop that attack from spreading. Your backups. Really critical should you suffer a technical fail, but even more critical if you suffer a ransomware attack. If you've got your backup and it's secure and it's kept away from your operating online daily system, the attacker will have to break another system to get their hands on your backup, which means you've got the ability to recover from that without paying a ransom. What I would also recommend is test it. We see so many instances. I'm sure if we all think back when we used to get a new mobile phone, it's an Apple device, you used to create that new device from your backup. I, for one, have had the horrible message of your last backup is corrupt and you can't use it. Very much similar in your backups that you're taking of your operating systems and all of your data today within your business. Test it to make sure that you can recover from it. Looking at privileged access, that's really looking at who has the high level credentials and making sure they have the right access based on what they need. So we talk about least privilege. So only having access to the data that you need to perform your job, nothing more. And if you do need someone to have special access or wide access, put it on a time limit so they only get it for a few days, a few weeks, a few months, depending on what they might be looking at. Looking at your network protection and making sure that you think of that as like your front door of your building and the front door of your home. You don't leave it wide open. Your network protection is making sure those front doors are nicely and strongly sealed and locked up. Email filtering and web security. Email filtering. Email is the most common vector of attack and has been for several years. By email filtering, what you're doing is before the user gets the email and makes a decision on what they might want to do with it, you've got a technical system that is going, that's spam, that's junk, that's virus, that's a malware, that's ransomware, and taking those away so the individual never makes a decision on what to do with those. And web filtering, very similar, but it's looking at websites and it's stopping your employees from accessing certain websites. And that can be based on what the website is advertised to be doing or the security function of that website. So they're not going on their company device, they're not going on to websites that are not secure or unknown for then using that website to deploy a cyber attack into your organization. Patch and vulnerability management. So patch that, when you get that notification on your iPhone or on your Android device to say there is an operating update. Years ago, it used to just tell you were going to get a new emoji and it was going to look better, it was going to feel better. you'll see the change now. They're telling you it's a security vulnerability. And I think that's where understanding and appetite for being secure has changed. They no longer have to sell the vulnerability patch as a nice to have user interface improvement. They can now tell you it's a security vulnerability, which will hopefully trigger you to apply that. The same is true with your laptops and also all of your back-end infrastructure devices. When a day zero attack happens, so that's an attack that I know it was never been seen before, all of the providers will then, so Microsoft, Cisco, and that, you know, it's a huge list, they will check that device or that application to see if it has that vulnerability in it, and that's where the push comes out for patches. So making sure that all your devices remain patched and updated can really reduce your risk. Same at home. Make sure all of your kids' devices, your devices are all applying those updates. I delayed one a few minutes ago for an hour so that we didn't cut off the middle of this session. I think human nature is, oh, it's so inconvenient, I'll push it away. By applying that patch, you are really taking yourself away from a top target and really starting to bring yourself down that list. Attackers know where those vulnerabilities are too, and they will scan the internet to find devices that haven't had that update, and that's often how they'll then deploy their attacks based on that. As I talked about, cyber incident response planning and testing, very much that business continuity disaster recovery, and cyber security awareness training and phishing simulation. Invest in your humans. Make sure we're training them to take the right action. Make sure we're helping them to make better decisions, both at home to protect themselves as an individual, but also in the workplace. We often find if we teach them well at home, best practices to keep themselves safe, they'll bring that great behavior into the workplace. And then looking at your supply chain, which we'll talk about in a future webinar. And then the final two are end of life management. So all devices become end of life, and that's when you're not getting those updates anymore, and they become very vulnerable in your organization. Anything from a mobile phone to a server has a life on it, and at end of life, you're no longer getting those security updates. And then we have what's called a remote desktop protocol. So this one is a bit technical, but that's just making sure that certain actions have been turned off. So think of it a bit like the windows of your building. You're closing those windows and doors and making sure you haven't left anything open that someone can jump through. The 12 controls I've just talked you through are part of Cyber Essentials, Cyber Assurance, and ISO 27001. So if you have those certifications, you're already looking at those elements of what you've already got in place. But if you don't have those badges, you don't have those certifications, it's certainly a great place to start to understand maybe where some of the areas are that you have some risk. Actions against these 12 controls don't always cost money. They sometimes just cost a bit of time, making sure that things are turned on properly, making sure they're functioning properly. So it doesn't always have to result in expense to you as an individual or as a company. That's kind of it for the session today. There's a lot more information in the paper that we will share, and that'll come through Laura. As Laura mentioned at the beginning, we have 2 more webinars planned. So we've got the threat landscape for 2025, specifically for manufacturing. And then the final session will be focused purely on supply chain for manufacturing in the automotive sector and what you can be doing to protect your supply chain. I guess, does anyone have any questions?